The story begins with a man named Nicholas, a seasoned hiker who knew the Bridger-Teton National Forest like the back of his hand. Living in Jackson, Wyoming, he often spent his free time walking among the tall trees, enjoying the peaceful solitude the forest offered. But on this particular day, something felt off. The usual calm of the forest seemed different, as if the air was thick with an unspoken tension. That morning, like so many others, Nicholas woke up early. He made a strong cup of coffee and sat down to catch the morning news. The headline that day made his stomach twist. A woman named Bridget Williams had gone missing in the very forest he loved. She'd been hiking alone 3 weeks ago and hadn't been seen since. Despite the unsettling story, Nicholas brushed off his worry and decided to go for his usual hike. By 7 a.m., he was on his way, eager to breathe in the crisp morning air and lose himself in the beauty of the wilderness. He never could have imagined that this day would be unlike any other. The forest he knew so well, the one that had always brought him peace, would soon hold secrets he wasn't ready to face. This time, Nicholas wouldn't be coming home. By the time he arrived at the Bridger-Teton National Forest, it was still early. The crisp, cool air felt refreshing against his skin as he stepped out of his car. The fog curled around the trees, giving the forest a mysterious, quiet feel. Nicholas shook off the thoughts about the missing woman and reminded himself that he knew this forest well. He had hiked these trails for years, and today felt no different. The calm and familiarity of the woods always gave him peace. For the first few hours, everything seemed just as it should be. The weather was grey, but not too cold, and Nicholas welcomed the solitude of the forest. The sounds of birds singing, leaves rustling, and insects buzzing filled the air. It was the usual music of nature that comforted him. As he walked, his thoughts wandered to work and the busy week he had just left behind. The quiet of the woods was the perfect escape, and he felt his stress begin to melt away. But soon, something felt off. The forest, usually full of life, seemed eerily quiet. He hadn't seen a single other hiker, which struck him as strange. He brushed it off, thinking maybe the weather was keeping people away. But as he continued down the trail, the silence grew heavier. It wasn't just the lack of people. It was the absence of the usual sounds that made the forest feel alive. Deciding to take a break, he sat down on a large rock, pulled out his water bottle, and tried to shake the feeling. That's when he first heard it. A rustle in the distance. At first, Nicholas thought it was just the wind, or maybe a small animal moving through the brush. But the sound didn't stop. Then he heard it clearly, the soft whine of a dog. His heart skipped a beat as he looked around, his eyes scanning the quiet forest. The sound was getting closer, and soon enough, out of the bushes, a husky appeared. The dog's fur was matted, and its eyes were wide with fear. It moved slowly toward Nicholas, whining softly, and looked up at him with sad, pleading eyes. Instinctively, Nicholas bent down, his hand reaching out to gently pet the dog. He'd always loved animals and could tell this wasn't a stray. The dog seemed distressed, like it was looking for help. "Hey, boy," Nicholas said quietly, running his hand over the dog's fur. "Where's your owner?" The husky turned and took a few steps further into the forest. It paused, glancing back at Nicholas as if urging him to follow. Nicholas hesitated for a moment, unsure. But something in the dog's eyes made him feel he had to help. Then, a thought struck him. Was this the dog from the news report? What if it was trying to lead him to Bridget Williams? He didn't waste any time. Nicholas stood up, adjusted his backpack, and began following the husky deeper into the woods. His instincts told him it was the right thing to do, even though he was already stepping off the main trail. The dog seemed to know where it was going, and Nicholas trusted it. As they went further into the forest, the world around him grew quieter. The usual sounds of birds, rustling leaves, and distant animals were completely gone. The trees, thick and towering, seemed to close in around him. The husky led the way, its nose to the ground, ears perked as if it was on a mission. Nicholas, though confused, felt he had to follow. He had hiked these woods many times, but never this far off the trail. The deeper they went, the more uneasy he became. The forest looked different, and with every step, he felt more lost. An hour passed, and Nicholas realized he had no idea where he was. The sun was starting to set, and the forest grew darker by the minute. He knew he should turn back, but he couldn't leave the dog. Suddenly, the husky stopped. It sniffed the ground, tail raised, then moved toward a hidden clearing. Nicholas's heart raced as he followed, unsure of what lay ahead. As he walked closer to the clearing, Nicholas couldn't shake the growing feeling of unease. What was the dog trying to show him? Was it leading him to Bridget? Or was there something worse waiting for him? Each step he took made the sense of dread stronger, but he couldn't turn back now. When he finally reached the clearing, his heart skipped a beat. At first, he couldn't make sense of what he saw. A small pile on the ground, barely noticeable under some branches and leaves, caught his attention. Then, as he drew closer, a cold shiver ran down his spine. He saw the shoes, the gloves, and realized with horror, it was a person. The dog moved closer to the pile, pawing at it and whining softly, almost as if it was urging him to help. Nicholas took a slow, hesitant step forward. His heart was racing in his chest, and his mind was a blur. He had to know what was going on, even though he feared the worst. When he got close enough, he finally saw her face. It was Bridget Williams. His breath caught in his throat. She was alive, but just barely. Nicholas dropped to his knees, his emotions flooding him. Shock, relief, and fear all mixed together. He reached out a shaking hand and gently touched her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice trembling. Bridget's eyes snapped open, gasping for breath. She was alive. Barely. "Thank you," she whispered through chattering teeth. "Thank you so much." Nicholas quickly handed her his water bottle, and she drank it eagerly, pausing only to thank him again. As she sat up, she began to explain what had happened. She had been hiking when her dog, Zeus, spotted a squirrel and ran after it. She chased after him, but soon found herself lost. With no phone and no way to call for help, she had been wandering the forest for days, surviving on wild berries and the water she had left. Nicholas listened closely, his heart aching for her. She had been so close to giving up when he found her. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by gratitude, but he knew the toughest part still lay ahead. They were still lost. Without wasting any time, Nicholas called the authorities, explaining the situation and giving them his location. He was lucky enough to find a signal, and soon a search team was on their way. While they waited, Bridget continued to thank him, her voice trembling. Nicholas felt a rush of pride. He had saved a life today. A few hours later, the rescue team arrived, amazed that Bridget had survived for so long on her own. She was weak and exhausted, but alive. Nicholas and Zeus were praised for finding her. But for Nicholas, the best part was knowing she was safe. He was just glad he had followed that dog into the woods. Without it, he might never have found her.